Hello and welcome to another episode of Monday Markets. We have the monthly close coming up in 1 day and 6 hours. Same old monthly range high at 23.3k. And realistically, if the market closes around here, it's going to be a neutral signal at best. And the reason there is if it's going to close in or around resistance, I need to be at least mentally ready for a pullback from monthly resistance to monthly support. Doesn't mean it has to happen, but I have to entertain the scenario nonetheless. And as we know, the monthly support is at 19.5 to 20.5. One other way to think about it is what would a really bullish monthly close look like at this range high? And just like any other breakout, you'd want to see a significant displacement between the close and the level itself, and just evidence of a clear breakout. You know, let's say the market closed right here on the month, we'll have had a spike above previous month's high and a close at resistance. I mean, that's not a breakout candle, right? And the breakout candle, as we've discussed, you know, if this is a monthly range breakout, we have to target the next monthly area, which is this kind of 28 to 30-ish, up to 34 previous range low, broken support, turn resistance. But until we get like an impulse candle through this high time frame range high, I have to assume range-bound conditions, or at least consolidation, or basically anything other than a breakout. Thankfully, the pullback scenarios are fairly self-evident. It's either so low time frame that it just basically chops at the level and then breaks out later, or if it does pull back more visibly, it has to hold 20k because there's nothing else worth buying below that. So that makes our decision tree very easy. So just as far as the monthly time frame goes, it looks like it's going to be a bit of a wash. When that's the case, then I have to just look on the weekly and the daily to get an indication for how the next trading periods are going to form. And I also have to keep in the back of my mind that if monthly resistance has done its job or prevented a breakout, I need to be open to the possibility of a pullback to monthly support. Okay. Now, as far as how the other timeframes are shaping up, given this view, nothing terribly different yet. It's kind of the same story on the weekly, right? So if we take that same weekly range high at 24k, we kind of have very similar price action just on the lower time frame, where the market is just pushing up and grinding against that level. There's no super obvious rejection yet. I mean, if we look at last week's price action, it's literally an inside week, right? That is to say, the price action of the preceding week, the price action of the inside week is contained within the high and low of the preceding week. So that tends to be just a bit of a flat volatility fall off candle. And it's not an obvious rejection yet. You know, it's still basically going sideways, right? If we just zoom out and look at the last month of trading, this is more or less sideways, right? There isn't anything particularly crazy going on. So we're still below resistance and finding resistance at the range high, but no obvious rejection where we're like, okay, finally the visible pullback is coming and we can do business at a clearly defined higher low area. It's neither here nor there, right? Not enough evidence to suggest, hey, look, we've got a monthly and weekly breakout, let's target higher prices. And at the moment, not enough evidence of a very clear rejection yet. Certainly not to a point where we can do business at very clear higher low, do or die type of inflection points, which, as we've discussed, coalesce closer to the sort of 20k area. It's just resistance grind. It was resistance grind last week. It was a close below resistance the week before that. So not too dissimilar as far as price action goes. Down to the daily time frame is where we might get some faster acting information. The level I was watching, given recent developments, is just this highest close within this consolidation at 23.7k, and that's where the market's been sort of rejected today. I think the level of support, if we're going to deal with, again, the shallow consolidation, and the reason I'm focusing so much on this, right, sort of the consolidation of the last couple of weeks, is because if it starts to puke, we kind of all know what to do, right? In one form or another, 20k is the support that has to hold. Now, whether that's 20.6 or 19.8, it ultimately doesn't matter. We know on the monthly and a weekly closing basis, you can't lose 20k in one form or another. So that part is very straightforward. So what we can focus on is either breakout opportunities, or if we don't get the deeper pullback, we might have to do business with an intermediate range or more shallow pullback. So the reason I'm not sort of putting too much time towards, oh, what if it giga nukes from resistance, is because, again, the decision tree there is fairly straightforward. You basically have one high time frame level where you can't get any, realistically shouldn't get any weekly and monthly acceptance below it, because then otherwise the, you know, argument for strength goes out the window. So back to the topic at hand, if we're dealing with this intermediate range in the absence of a higher time frame pullback, what are the relevant levels? And I think there are two. One is, as I mentioned, this sort of former range high. It's a bit messy, but honestly, in the recent interactions, it's been a bit better. Even you can see a couple of lows here, resistance, fine. So 23.7 is the current consolidation range high. And then for the current consolidation range low, I've essentially got this level that should be familiar to some of you, 22.7 or thereabouts. You could do what Don did, which is box out this entire candle, and that's pretty reasonable. It all falls in the same area. So that's really where I think the range we're trading within for the time being. If we kind of zoom out and take a look of how price action transpired here, we spent a lot of time in this range, wasn't accepted below, right? Wasn't accepted above, and now we're trading back within it. So I think those boundaries are fairly straightforward. Bears tried to step on it, no success. Bulls tried to step on it, no success. And now we're trading back within those range boundaries. Even on the 4-hour time frame, I think if you zoom out, you can start to see this range is pretty self-evident. Like, this is literally the largest consolidation that we've had. Attempt at acceptance through, nope. Attempt at acceptance through, nope. And we're back here. It's not terribly exciting, but as I said, there are no terribly exciting signals on the high time frames at the moment. Resistance is resisting, and we haven't reached a scary, visible, deeper pullback level of support yet. What I will say is, the longer we sort of stay within this consolidation, and really any further time spent here, subject to change, I would be less willing to fade breaks through the boundaries. So again, we've already had a significant attempt to break to the downside that wasn't successful. We've already had a significant attempt to do that on the upside that wasn't successful, and now we're clearly respecting sort of the range boundaries in their original form. I think if we get another real attempt, so, you know, acceptance on the daily or at least 4-hour, but ideally daily, through this range high, I'd be more inclined to believe that it's going to be a real push towards the highs and into resistance. And the same goes for support, right? We've already had the deviation at support. If the market's strong, it shouldn't start closing below it. So if we start getting acceptance there, I'd be more inclined to believe that, you know, basically this move was bullshit. Second time bullshit isn't terribly likely. That's probably the real move. This move was bullshit. Second time bullshit isn't particularly likely. That's probably the real move. You know, it comes back to that same principle we've discussed ad nauseam of double fake outs aren't terribly common. And I think we've had a compelling fake out on either side. So the next move to me is more likely to be real. And also, I'm just trying not to lose my mind too much. You know, I've spent a lot of detail on this and sort of time spent talking about this consolidation, but ultimately it's not that important, right? And the reason I say that is because if there's a monthly and weekly breakout, the leg that follows, that's the one you want to be trading actively. That's an important one. Also, if this really starts to puke and we get our 19, 20 high time frame pullback, that's also the really formative leg and the one you want to trade. This kind of intermediate point where it's the resistance grind and chop under nothing, chop above nothing and go sideways, it's definitely tradable and the levels are good, but it's far less important, I think, to be correctly positioned on that one compared to the big breakout or the do or die dump type of thing. Also, this is just like quintessential crypto Twitter TA, draw big arrow either way and then retweet it later. But I hope you get my point, right? Like, I'm happy to talk about these structures because they're good, they're tradable, and they're relevant to where we are now. Again, we are trading today's market, not last week's market or last month's market or whatever. But just in terms of kind of priority and hierarchy, I'm much more interested in the do or die dip into monthly levels or the breakout move into higher time frame levels, more so than not losing my mind on the intermediate time frame chop and consolidation. So I hope that makes sense. At least the levels are fairly self-evident. Again, you can always just kind of box these out, box these out, or refine them in ways that make more sense to you. But I ultimately think that's what's going on. We're still within this consolidation, no downside break, no upside break, and voila, we're back. We are so back. That's what makes sense to me, to be honest. As far as ETH goes, nothing too dissimilar to offer at the time of recording. Don and I spend every casual Friday basically dissing ETH USD, so I guess I can't have particularly strong views on that. Similar conclusion to Bitcoin as far as the higher time frame breakout attempt goes. That is to say, there's at the moment no clear evidence of a higher time frame breakout. We're still getting that same resistance, chop, churn, consolidation. And again, if the monthly closes like this, it's still going to be a monthly close at resistance. Then we'll have to look at the weekly on the daily because there'll be no reprieve on this time frame if you're looking for a breakout. As far as the weekly goes, honestly, you know, forget levels, forget market structure for a second, and just look at this, right? We've basically gone nowhere for 5 weeks. Just this consolidation, you know, the last 5 weekly candles, full candles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 even, that's 6 weeks of doing nothing, basically. So, you know, if you're developing particularly strong views and flipping from extreme bull to extreme bear, given what's highlighted in front of you, you might want to reconsider because structurally, fuck all has happened. Again, the market is still at resistance. That is kind of the dominant theme here, but there hasn't been a ton of price action to chase either way, right? And that's really, I think, the only meaningful thing that can be gleaned from the weekly time frame. The only other thing I'll mention is Bitcoin has the Omni support at 20k, again 20.6, 19.8, whatever. It's all the same level, especially when viewed from a monthly lens. I think the nearest equivalent I'd be willing to come up with for ETH is around 1400, perhaps down to sort of 1360, 1380, because there are some nice daily levels there. Anything else, as I've mentioned before, would just start to look really bad and not make a particularly compelling case for a higher low. Because at that point, if this level pukes, right, if there's a larger pullback and this level pukes, and then we're jumping ahead a little bit, at that point, we end up giving back so much of this big momentum candle that it's hard to see that as a plausible higher low. So I guess the closest equivalent, and it's not a direct comparison, but just to sort of extend the analogy, the Bitcoin Omni support is 20k in one form or another. I think for ETH, if we finally get some sort of visible pullback and don't get tortured by chop for n number more weeks, that same level or structure is around 1350 to 1400 for ETH, at least on a weekly closing basis. As far as the daily goes, again, I think the daily time frame reflects the sort of misery that we've all been encumbered by in the past few weeks, where it's just basically been this. Right, the breakout didn't go anywhere. The breakdown didn't go anywhere. The retest levels haven't been particularly crazy. It's just chop. It's just chop. But again, contextually, the chop is at high time frame resistance. You need to be on guard a little bit in the absence of a high time frame breakout. Just because there hasn't been a visible high time frame pullback yet doesn't mean there can't be one. So don't get lulled into sort of sense of false security as far as low volatility conditions go. And I do think you can navigate ETH USD decently by looking at this daily range in one form or another. And again, you can draw the wicks, you can draw the bodies, doesn't really matter, especially when the market's this choppy. We all know that this is kind of a monthly area and we need to be generous with how we delineate these things. Difficult word to say. But I think the range high, again, 1670, 1680, 1660. Also the last time I went on a date, but in any case, that's our range high. And the equivalent range low is just the lowest close here at 1510. And that's basically what we're dealing with, right? And if we kind of carve out a midpoint for that, which I think we might have done last week, but I don't remember, that's not a midpoint, that's my pullback meme. If we carve out the midpoint, I think we did this in the last stream. Look, it just works. This is the range we're in, this is the consolidation. Overhead, we know there's monthly resistance kind of looming over us. But in the short term, I think the range trading approach to this has been fine. And so this is just in the consolidations or proven. Otherwise, if you want to short to medium trade those boundaries, that's absolutely fine, certainly in the absence of a higher time frame breakout. And the reason I say that is because if you don't, if there is an absence of evidence for a high time frame breakout, our presumption has to be at least consolidation, if not kind of continuation lower from range high to range low or from monthly resistance to monthly support. But if we just keep getting tortured by, again, the scenario I mentioned where there's no big breakout and there's no big pullback and we just get chopped, well, then you just have to trade the range for what it is. And I think at least as far as that goes, the levels have been fine. There's an anticlimactic adjective for you. Yeah, I really think that's kind of the only thing I care about on the daily time frame, because I know that the bigger pullback levels, I said 1380, 1400-ish on the weekly have to hold. But if the market doesn't want to expand, I'll just pay attention to the levels that make sense now. And to me, it's that daily range we talked about. So hopefully that makes sense. Nothing too interesting from Legacy World yet. We had the rejection from the monthly and weekly resistance we spoke about at length, and it's kind of just drifting towards the next weekly level. I think Don's support level is a bit earlier and starts from here, given he's got... What's he got? Oh, he's on the weekly, of course. He has basically this consolidation boxed out, so the level starts a bit earlier. But ultimately, it's the same thing where it's a higher time frame rejection, and it looks like we're still within this range. So a bit of a pain in the ass, to be honest with you. It looks like, absent something crazy happening in the next day and 5 or 6 hours, we're going to close in or around resistance. That would also mean we're closing back within the sort of intermediate range we're trading with. The more compelling signals would be a big breakout or a deeper pullback into a higher low. And at the moment, the market isn't offering that, and it's stuck at this kind of midpoint intermediate level where it's neither here nor there. which is fine, again, because this is a weekly show. When I say neither here nor there, that just means from a high time frame swing perspective. As we've demonstrated, the levels themselves are still very good and tradable, but just in the view of higher time frame kind of expansion, there isn't a ton of evidence available at the moment for that on the breakout side, and we still need to be somewhat guarded given we are responding to resistance, right? And again, even if it ends up being a bullish response to resistance, so it doesn't pull back or do whatever, you still need to consider the range boundaries. Ultimately, let's say 1400 is the big pullback level for ETH, and we're saying, oh, look, careful, the market's being rejected from monthly resistance. That doesn't mean it has to kind of do this or even go back here in the first place, which is why I think absent high time frame breakout triggers, you just got to trade the nearest range for what it is. And if it does give you the high time frame pullback, well, then you sort of know what to do, or at least at that point, there's only one level area structure to trade, 1400-ish. For ETH, if we get a monthly pullback, if we don't, trade this range. 20-ish for BTC, if we get a high time frame pullback. If we don't, trade the daily range we talked about. Otherwise, let's just try not to lose our cool, because as we've seen from the daily and the weekly, it's been a whole lot of nothing in terms of structure. So you don't want to lose your shirt before volatility expands. So that's all from me. If you enjoy these videos, click the thumbs up. I know it's a lot to ask for, apparently, but we are grateful for your support on the channel. I'm being facetious there. We love all of you, and thank you for sticking around. But that's all from me. trletter.com for our free weekly newsletter. God knows what that thing will say. Don and I will have a chat about it. And then usual deluge of content coming your way later on. Hope you all had an excellent weekend, and see you later in the week. Bye-bye.